Hatsquile eich tanoia, toitstanat quian quinshaman, cis quiansna. And here I am next to this beautiful red flowering currant. As you can see, it lives up to its name with its beautiful blossoms, and I just love this shrub. You can see it's a very lovely, large, hardy shrub. It's been well taken care of and pruned in places. And it's a phenomenal plant. It comes up every year and on its own, as all perennials do, and welcomes the spring. Amongst the usual suspects that love this particular tree and bush are the hummingbirds. When we arrived, I saw bumblebees bouncing around on the flowers, and it's also in its own right a medicine. So by the way, if you ever find any of these and wonder why there's no berries, I'll tell you a funny story about it. That, in the early days of colonialism, there were people that collected flora and fauna from around the world. And so this species was collected from the Pacific Northwest coast and brought to England and cloned. And when they cloned it, it no longer produced berries, but it continues to produce fruit. So it's kind of a weird thing. And sometimes you may end up buying the variety that is the cloned variety. So be sure to be watching out. We'll put some footnotes into the plant profile for this week so you know what to watch out for. And if you don't really want the berries, that's fine. But the thing is that one of the inspiring ways of elements of indigenous gardening is not only to produce food for the pollinators and to give us beautiful flowers to look at, but also that when those flowers are pollinated and the fruits are produced, we can either eat these, the currants are very delicious, or we can let the birds eat them, which is, I think, becoming more and more important to look at that idea of growing our bird feeders. In other words, growing indigenous species that produce foods for both the pollinators and the regional and migratory birds. And so this is a lovely plant. You can see the leaves are kind of almost like in palm shape of your hand. And you can make a tea out of the leaves and the berries, and I think so many people have grown up drinking black currant tea, or these are also actually red currants. They're still very delicious. My father would actually just pick them, freeze them, and then we'd make jam or jelly out of them, or put them on our make a syrup and put it on our pancakes or ice cream or whatever. So lots of uses. We also use the flowers in a tea for blood pressure, but be mindful to save some for the wild creatures. So that's our beautiful, wonderful red flowering currant. As I said, it's one of the early flowering plants. The blossoms have been coming out for about a month now, so they start in late March, early April, and they continue on into May, where then the fruits start to appear. And yeah, you can gather it throughout the year. You can also, this is another one of those indigenous plants that if you decide, you want to prune it, but you don't know what to do with your branches, well, you can stick them in spots that you want them to grow and they'll reroot and you'll get more. So again, propagating. We love that. So yeah, so that's our red flowering currant.
Sweet. And what about this beautiful nettle over here?
So yes, that's a great segue. I wanted to go into talking about this beautiful, luscious, stinging nettle that is growing at the base of this red flowering currant. And as you can see, we got some different shapes of leaves coming up. Some of them are big and fat. One of the things you might notice, I'll try to not be in the sun, is a little bit of the red tinge. So that's a good, that's another one of the qualities about it you'll notice. Some people don't know stinging nettle, and I think they believe, oh, this is mint. Then they come up and touch it and find out otherwise. So it lives up to its name. And you can catch in the sunlight some of the little hairs on the plant, and those are the stinging parts of the plant as well as the leaf. The leaf is covered in them. And you might wonder, what is the use of a plant that is stinging all the time? Well, it is very high in iron. It is a rhizome-based plant, so it is spreading all over this site and into other patches around here. And it has several uses. Like, it seems like there's almost endless uses to the stinging nettle. So as a medicine, if you have arthritis in your joints, you can literally, especially in your hands, you can literally like touch this plant live and it will help to deal with the pain, the stinging in your joints, and it will take swollen joints and take away the edge of the swelling. It will actually start to release it. And that's one of the things the little hairs do, is that it's like they get into your skin and you see little welts, but for somebody that doesn't have arthritis, it's going to hurt a lot. For somebody with arthritis, it's going to spell relief. And what you get in the beginning is a warming sensation. You might get a little like sting when you first touch it, but then it goes away and it starts to warm, and then you start to feel circulation in the area that you've just touched it. Now, I also want to say, don't go rubbing it in. I've heard people do that and say, oh, it was terrible, I rubbed it in really hard and it hurt. And I'm like, don't rub it in hard. Just take it and put it on gently. And that will allow it doesn't need much, because the hairs literally will attach to your skin and start to work. I've used this for a number of things, for iron deficiency, so drinking it as a tea. And you want to get it when it's low growing like this and before it gets up to your hips, because once it gets a bit higher, it starts the stalk starts to become more fibrous. And that leads me to another way to use this fabulous plant, which will appeal to those of you who are fiber and textile artists and experimenters. And what it is an amazing and very strong weaving material. And so when it starts to get really tall, you want to really nurture that. And if you decide you want to crop it down a bit and tend it, because maybe it's getting a little out of hand, and these can grow like 10 to 15 feet high. So take your own initiative to trim it when you want. The hotter it is, the more fibrous you're going to get out of your stinging nettle. And with global warming, that won't be too hard, because we're already in April and hitting our first heat wave of the year. So beware in the forests, watch out, don't be carrying anything lit with you. But when you're tending to your stinging nettles, or if you have a wild patch you go to, watch for when it gets to about waist high. Then you're going to stop using it as a tea, because it's going to be quite fibrous, and let it grow to maybe, I'm about 5'4", so about my height is a good height. And then just start trimming it down. If you have a scythe, you can scythe it down. If you have some really good gloves and you really want to cover your body when you get in there and trim it, and then put it somewhere cold and dark and dry, and let it just sit for even the next year. The longer it sits, the better. And but you want to spread it out so it doesn't mold up, and that it just dries and aerates. And so once you get that, then you can go into your next season and start processing it and learning how to weave with it. And there are a number of YouTube videos on stinging nettle processing and weaving. And I'm excited to say I'm currently working with Sharon Callis alongside my fabulous friend Jolene Andrew, and the two of us are collectively doing a weaving residency, and one of the materials we're working on is the beautiful stinging nettle. So there's a number of uses. So I injured myself, I don't know, about 4 or 5 years ago. I twisted my ankle, and it was like, it was so painful, and it kept swelling, and it was hot out, so it didn't help. One of the first things I used was frog leaf, but when I got a chance, I got into some stinging nettle, and I just got a friend to to snip a stalk, a short stalk, and just use the stalk to hit around the outside of my ankle, because it was quite fat, and I think it was because it was getting warm and it wasn't fully healed. And once I did that, it went through, again, the first initial ow, to then it got in there, it started tingling, and I could literally feel it get into the small joints in my foot, in my ankle. And by the time I think a few hours had passed, I was checking on it, and the tingling was continuing, but the swelling had gone down quite a bit. And over the next few days, I just kept an eye on it, and those medicinal elements in the stinging nettle continued to work on their own over 3 days, and took all the pain out of my ankle and the swelling. So it healed up really well. I was so happy. I also drink this, so I was saying it's high in iron, it's also high in calcium. And it's a plant that pairs well with a lot of other indigenous plants to drink as teas. So you can mix it with salmonberry or raspberry leaves. You can mix it with mint and rose hips, dandelion and burdock roots. So investigate this plant a bit further and think about that. And one more thing I forgot to say is that you can actually steam these and cook these and eat them. And it probably sounds funny. Why would I want to put some stinging sensation into my mouth and throat? Well, two things about this that stop the stinging. One is drying the plant. When you dry the plant, it stops stinging. Another thing, that when you heat it, so if you make a tea and you dip it into the tea, it stops stinging. You can make omelets and lasagna. You can make
Spanakopita.
Yeah, you can make you can also do a potato and stinging nettle soup. So instead of leek, you can use stinging nettle. And so those are other things. And then I'm gonna wind it down by letting you know that it has natural antihistamine qualities. So if you're struggling right now with the pollen, as we see all around us, and you're like, what can I do? Everything with pollen bugs me. Okay, then go out and get your stinging nettle tea on. And all you really need is a small little handful for a cup of tea. But if you want to go out and pick in a patch that's like this, again, wear the proper gloves and put it in a paper bag, bring it home and dry it out on a table or on a cookie sheet, and just let it dry. You can hand process it or put it in a blender on low and just chop it up. And then put a teaspoon to a cup, and that's going to help. Drink that every day. You're going to see the symptoms like the mucus, the itchy eyes and watering eyes. All of that will start to subside. So yeah, it's for pollen allergies, just so you know. All right. We have one more plant we're going to cover, and it's large. It's a large plant. It's actually a huge tree. And it is something that most Canadians should know, this type of tree we're going to look at, because it is on our flag, and that is the big leaf maple.